If you've been listening to this show over the last year, you know a little bit about the story of Adam Maier-Clayton, who joined us a couple of times on 1310 News here on Ottawa Today. He was an advocate for assisted dying, particularly for people who were suffering from mental illness, as he was. He described what he was going through. And a few weeks back, Adam Maier-Clayton took his own life. We talked about it at the time and paid tribute to him. He certainly changed the way I thought about this issue, although I am still conflicted and confused about exactly what we should do with regard to people who are suffering from a mental illness and want to choose to take their own lives with the assistance of a doctor at a time when we're legalizing that in this country. We are joined today on Ottawa Today by Adam Maier-Clayton's mother, Margaret Maier. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, and I really appreciate you making yourself available. I think you have a very important story to tell, as your son did, and as I told you, I was very impressed with Adam, and a lot of people were, and he made me think a lot about this issue.
Yeah, thank you. There's so many different moving parts to this, and I know we don't have that much time, but I did want to just share a little bit about, I think people seem to think that my son really was brought down by mental illness. I mean, there's no question he struggled with anxiety, OCD. However, my son was living with me in Ottawa, and he was going to Algonquin College, and, he was managing, and he ended up going out with a bunch of frat boys one night, and they ended up smoking pot. This is the first time my son has done that. This night, he did it 3 times that night. And I guess he was being egged on by friends, and he really didn't want to do it. And then finally he had a little puff, and then he tried another puff, and then I guess he had 10 hits of a bong. And I'm telling you, my son called me the next day, and my son was permanently changed from that episode. And he had symptoms, for example, depersonalization disorder, where he couldn't handle light. He couldn't handle noises, sounds. He was a very different person. He came home not confident, really, 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 really messed up. And it just went from bad to worse. And I'm upset because we went to all the hospitals in Ottawa. And at the Queensway Carleton Hospital, we were informed by a psychiatrist there that they'd been seeing many young adults, my son's age, at the time he was 24 and earlier. They're seeing connections between marijuana use, even first-time marijuana use, and psychosis. Now, the doctors call it psychosis. I call it more brain trauma. My son's brain was traumatized by this event. But this is what really brought my son to his knees. And I don't understand why, 3 years earlier, why are psychiatrists from hospitals, if this is in fact what they're seeing, do they not have a fiduciary duty or responsibility to us, the taxpayers, their clients, to inform us so we can at least talk to our kids? I'll tell you one thing. My son was really smart. He was really ambitious. He was working at TD Bank. He really had a lot going for him, and that just destroyed him. And if he had known that this would have exacerbated his symptoms, he would not have smoked it. And we talked about that a lot. And I saw my son just dwindle down to nothing. And then the way he had to die, it was horrible. He was begging to die at the end because he had somatoform disorder. In other words, massive sulfuric acid burning pain. Nobody could deal with it. He went to all these psychiatrists and doctors. So in the end, he had to illegally import a drug from China. He had to do it in a way where we wouldn't know anything about it. He had to sneak off in the middle of the night, and he ended up committing suicide in some motel in Windsor. And I never got to say goodbye to my son. I mean, this has been horrendous on a lot of levels for our family, but I'm speaking as a mother today who, if you have a child, if you have a son, a daughter, grandchildren, it's really important to understand that anybody with anxiety, depression, any kind of mental illness should not go near marijuana. It's a fact, and there's lots of science coming out about this.
And obviously, that science is early, and it's hard to prove categorically what the combination of factors is that leads to that. But you're saying that for your son, a previous mental illness combined with the use of marijuana was a toxic and eventually a lethal combination.
Correct. Absolutely. And there is science. I've been actually looking up scientific reports, and they are suggesting now a stronger link than they have, what we need to understand is we didn't really know that much. We didn't have a lot of science, but now we're looking at what's called cannabinoid receptors, which marijuana attaches in the brain, and it does affect certain parts of the brain, including the basal ganglia area, which is your cognition, your emotions, things like that. And so we're seeing more and more science coming out, and I'm just one of those people. I mean, if there's suggestions, at least listen to it. At least talk to your kids. I can't stop anyone from smoking pot, but there is correlations between THC in the marijuana and psychosis.
How do you feel about everything you've read in the context of the fact that marijuana is being legalized in Canada and assisted dying is being legalized in Canada at the same time as you're hearing all this information and reading these reports and experiencing what you've been through and viewing that as a toxic combination? Well,
you brought up 2 points. There's the assisted dying issue. It's still, my son was looking at opening it up more, like for extenuating circumstances for individuals for refractory illness. So it's actually, we're not really planning on legalizing, not the way it's looking. I don't think the Trudeau government wants to deal with it. They've set up a committee in Toronto. It's all a bunch of elite professionals and academics run by a gentleman who's actually against it. So I think they want to put the kibosh on that.
On assisted dying for people with mental illnesses.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they want to keep it as confined as possible. Right. They're not comfortable. There's a lot of people that are not comfortable with this. I really didn't know that much about the issue until I started talking to my son and learning about all these different sufferers and what they're going through, the pain and agony. We're talking years and years of agony. We're not talking, like Adam said, somebody with depression and anxiety for 3 months who wants to kill themselves. No, we're not talking about that on any level.
And I think the point that he made over and over again very effectively is that if we are to treat mental illness as a genuine illness that is the same as a physical illness and that has the same kind of pain as a physical illness, then why would we distinguish between people who have physical illnesses and people who have mental illnesses if they are of the mental capacity to make a decision about their own future? If they are of sound mind and are able to make a decision about their own future, why would we distinguish between the two?
Yeah, correct. And obviously, I come from a different place. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I know a lot about addiction. I work with addicts. I have seen how alcohol destroys families, generations of people, including children. And so obviously I am not at all in favor of legalization. And I've actually been looking at legalization of marijuana, and I've actually been looking at the stats. And while it appears that 3/4 of the population is equally split, pro and con, there's about 26% of people in this country right now who have not made a decision. And I feel that Prime Minister Trudeau took advantage of the youth vote to get elected, which worked. But there has been no conversation about this. And we need to have a lot more conversation. This is going to affect our children for a long, long time, economically, emotionally, mentally. And right now, I don't know what the percentage is of young people with mental illness. I think it's about 2.3 million Canadians already with anxiety, depression. And so those people tend to also become the recreational users, right? So I think we need to open this up more. We need to have a greater discussion. And as a mom, I'm just encouraging you to learn more about this, talk to your children about it. And you never want to go through what we've been through. This destroyed my son. He was 27 years old.
All right, we have to take a quick break. We'll come back and talk some more. Margaret Maier, the mother of Adam Maier-Clayton. While James Comey's testimony continues in Washington, we are chatting with Margaret Maier, the mother of Adam Maier-Clayton. We told you about him many times, who took his own life, was suffering from mental illness. And why have you chosen to talk publicly about this and to raise some of these issues? And what is the message that you're hoping to leave people with?
Well, I think often when people have family members that commit suicide, there's a lot of shame. We have absolutely no shame in our family. My son actually did try to do good even at the end of his life, and I'm very proud of him for that. I think, however, that we do need to have much more of a discussion about the negative impacts of marijuana on young adults and their developing brains. There's absolutely no conversation in this country. I think politically, hospitals might even feel shut down because we're supposed to, quote, legalize it next year. I just think, you know what? This is an issue that affects all of us and our children. And I'm speaking to you as a mother today, a mother who's lost her son over smoking marijuana. And it needs to be discussed more. And I'm not going to stop until everybody across this country at least knows. If my son had known that this would have exacerbated his mental illness, he would have stayed away from it. He wasn't given the choice. Today, I'm giving you the choice to learn and understand more about this issue.
And you're going to write to the Prime Minister about this?
I'm writing to the Prime Minister and the Health Minister. I'm requesting meetings with them. And yes, I will continue discussing this. I'd also like in the future to be talking more about alternative treatments. My son was on 15 pills a day and they were not helping. And staying in that medical paradigm on just using drugs did not work for my son. So there's other things that we can also talk about in the future.
All right. Margaret Maier, thank you very much for sharing your story and sharing your time with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity, Mark.